So this is the next section, cellular radiation effects. We've done all the groundwork to be able to talk about this stuff now. So let's talk about cell sensitivity. And you know, one important thing is knowing that people have come before you and people have laid the groundwork. They've done all the hard work and all of these studies to understand this stuff. So there's two scientists called Bergonie and Tribondeau, and they've got a law called the law of Bergonie and Tribondeau. This law says plainly that cells that divide more or are less highly differentiated are generally more sensitive to radiation. So that is, the faster you divide, the more sensitive you are to radiation damage. And the less differentiated you are, the more sensitive you are to radiation damage. Can you think of a time in your life where your body's cells had to divide very rapidly, but were also not very specialized?
Certain age, you said?
Yeah, think a time in your life. Maybe not a time that you remember, but a time in your life. What was the beginning of your life like? The first 9 months of gestation, right? What had to happen? You had to go from a single cell, right, to 2 cells, to 4 cells, to 16 cells, to the trillions of cells that you are now, right? And you did that in, what, 9 months, 10 months, right? And you did the bulk of it in the first 8 to 10 weeks. You did the bulk of skeletal organogenesis in the first 8 to 10 weeks. So you had a period in your life where you were just jamming away building your parts, okay? So your cells were dividing at a rapid rate, and they started out being nothing special, okay? You put them under a microscope and you're nothing special, in those beginning stages. Your cells are not highly differentiated, specialized. Differentiation and specialization are the same thing, so if I interchange those, forgive me for that. Good, so cells that are highly mitotic, highly sensitive. Cells that are undifferentiated, highly sensitive. And, a fetus satisfies both of those things. That's one reason why we tend to avoid x-raying pregnant females when we can, when it's not medically necessary. Differentiation is the degree of specialization in structure and function. An example of highly differentiated cells that are extremely radioresistant, nerve cells. Okay, nerve cells are the most radioresistant cells in the body. You can't die from nerve cell damage. You can, if you read ahead in the book, you notice there was something called central nervous system syndrome, which is the type of syndrome associated with super duper high radiation doses, very acute, life-threatening. You don't actually die from nerve damage. You die from blood vessel hemorrhaging in those circumstances. You have brain death, but not because your nerve cells die, because your nerve cells are next to all the big blood vessels that explode and don't deliver oxygen to your nerve cells. Then they die. Okay. But for radiation, nerve cells can't necessarily be damaged. This is one reason why there's no such thing as cancer of neurons. You can have brain cancer, nervous system cancer, but it's not going to be cancer of the nerve cells. It's going to be cancer of probably the glial cells, the supportive cells, the structural cells that make up the scaffolding. I don't hate to hesitate to scaffolding, but the scaffolding of your brain. An example of undifferentiated, not specialized cells would be the cells lining your gastrointestinal tract. Those cells that do the absorbing of nutrients in your GI tract. Those cells are undifferentiated and they are highly mitotic. They're dividing and replacing themselves all the time. Another good example would be skin cells, epithelial cells, undifferentiated. So undifferentiated cells are those that have a more primitive structure. They don't have a degree of specialization, and for interesting reasons, more specialized cells are less sensitive. All right, say it in another way. More prolific or reproductive cells are not only those who divide more frequently, but those with a longer dividing future, those who are going to divide for longer. Those are more sensitive. More prolific equals more sensitive, how often you divide. More primitive equals more sensitive. So yeah, all blast cells, all forming cells, very radiosensitive. Stem cells, very radiosensitive. Embryos, very radiosensitive. So let's take a look at a list of cells and their relative sensitivities to each other. Going from the top of the list, the most highly radiosensitive types of cells. Let's see if I can zoom in here. So the top of the list lists the most highly radiosensitive, and you start at the top with things like lymphocytes, erythroblasts. Notice erythroblasts are very radiosensitive. That's number 2. But look down to number 14. Oh, sorry, 15. Erythrocytes. Okay, so an immature red blood cell, one of the most radiosensitive cells in your body. You're going to find those in the marrow, the red marrow. But once they mature and become an erythrocyte, they're very low on the list of things that are they're in the intermediate level, but they're low intermediate. They're almost low sensitivity like muscle and nerve cells are. So it's hard to hurt them. Okay, easy to hurt them when they're young. Yeah.
For the erythroblasts, would it make more sense to say that children who are obviously growing at a very rapid rate are more susceptible to potential damage to their bone marrow compared to adults who have fully developed bones?
Sure. As you age, right, you replace red marrow with yellow marrow, fat storage, right? So you need less, less red marrow. It's true that you just have less red marrow as you age, yeah. All of those metabolic processes begin to slow down as we age. So yeah, and that's one major reason why children are more radiosensitive than adults, yeah. Everything's just moving at a faster rate, including the production of red cells, absolutely. The lens of the eye. The lens of the eye is extremely radiosensitive, okay? Which is why, if you remember from the previous lectures on radiation units, we had a dose limit, right? We had a dose limit for the lens of the eye. By the way, does anybody remember what it is? 500 or 150? I believe it's 150 millisieverts. I'd have to double check though. But importantly, I don't have to remember that anymore, you guys do. I had to remember it for a long time. It's your guys' job now. But importantly, there is a dose limit for the lens of the eye. Okay, and we specify that separately from the 50 millisievert whole body yearly limit, right? So for my new students, we are monitored. We have our radiation doses monitored in the X-ray field, in all of radiation fields. We wear a badge right at our collar that measures our radiation dose, and we send that badge to a company every couple of months. And what do you got?
150.
That's what I thought, 150 millisieverts. So yeah, I do remember it. All right, good. That's just like, what's the 500s for marrow?
The lens of the eye is 150. 500
Right.
is bone marrow.
That's what it is. That's what I said, 500 for bone marrow, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
say 500 was the regular one.
So 150 is lens of the eye,
Uh-huh.
and 500 millisieverts for bone marrow.
Yeah.
Good, perfect. By the way, why is that 150? So the lens of the eye, your yearly dose limit is 50 millisieverts. Okay, don't worry about what those units mean. It's remember 50. Okay, why is the lens of the eye 150 millisieverts if it is one of the most highly sensitive organs in the body?
It doesn't get as much radiation as the rest of the body would.
It's a smaller structure. 150 millisieverts to a very small structure is not the same as 150 millisieverts to the whole body. Okay, so your whole body dose is actually very low. Your lens of the eye dose is still very low, and we actually have that as a separate monitoring thing. So you wear one badge, guys, and it monitors your radiation dose, and we are limited yearly to a dose called 50 millisieverts. It's a sievert is a unit of radiation dose, and the lens of the eye has a separate radiation dose of 150 millisieverts. What they do is you wear one badge, and then when it gets to the company, they extrapolate from whatever the badge received. They do a quick little formula, and they say, what did the lens of your eye get, and what did your whole body get, based on what the badge absorbed, right? Good. All right, a couple more things on here. Notice number 4 and 5. Oocytes, ova, spermatogonia, immature sperm cells, highly radiosensitive, okay? But look down to number 13, spermatozoa, okay? Spermatozoa, more matured sperm cells are less radiosensitive, right? So you have spermatogonia, highly radiosensitive, spermatozoa, less radiosensitive, and it has to do with the fact that they're just not making their components anymore, right? If you're copying a book, right, and someone's coming in and ripping pages out of the book, well, you're going to have a hard time copying the book, okay? But if you've already copied the book and someone comes in ripping pages out of the old book, well, this doesn't matter anymore, right? You've already copied the book. You're not radiosensitive anymore. And then down on the low end of radiosensitivity, muscle cells, connective tissue like cartilage, ligaments, tendons, and the nerve cells are the least radiosensitive. So we have body cells, and they're all different levels of radiosensitivity. So you would find that if you were exposed to large amounts of radiation, the first things that would happen are problems with your lymphatic system, your lymphocytes, problems with your production of red cells from your bone marrow, right? You don't become anemic right now after the radiation exposure. You become anemic down the road because you just disrupted your red cell production, okay? You can become, effectively short-term sterilized with a high enough dose because you don't ruin all of your current sperm. You destroy all of the spermatogonia, and in females, the oocytes that are developing. So as you increase in exposure, we get effects happening further down the list to these more radio-resistant tissues. So some small exceptions to the law of Bergonie and Tribondeau. The lens of the eye is super duper specialized, right? The lens of your eye has to be specialized so that it can transmit light, right? That's a super specialized type of cell without attenuating the light or, or refracting the light in any way. So highly differentiated, yet highly sensitive. That's an exception to the law. We think normally highly differentiated things are not sensitive. This is the opposite. Oocytes. Non-proliferating. They're not dividing, but highly sensitive. So it's a rule that we call a law. It's a general idea that we call a law. Developing embryos. Developing embryos are the highest in the list of things that are radiosensitive because of both things. Developing embryos are in their more primitive stages, and the earlier on that you are, the less specialized you are. And developing embryos are rapidly reproducing cells. Right? You got to go from a single cell to a recognizable structure in like 8 to 10 weeks. Okay. The first trimester, by the way, is the 8 to 10 weeks, is what I'm getting. The embryo in development is about 10 times more radiosensitive than the adult. So whatever damage is happening, amplified by about 10. The fetus after the first trimester, still more radiosensitive than an adult, but is more radio resistant than the first trimester fetus. And the reason why is after the first trimester, you have most of the structure built, okay? You're just maturing the structure after that.